Harrison Montgomery never imagined that entering his kitchen at midnight would expose a secret that would shatter everything he believed about success, wealth, and the woman who cleaned his floors. The sounds from the kitchen made him freeze in the hallway, classical music and the rhythmic precision of professional knife work. His $100,000 custom kitchen was supposed to be empty at this hour. For 15 years, Harrison had built an empire, surrounding himself with rare ingredients worth tens of thousands, wine collections, and art he barely noticed. But he'd lost the ability to experience any of it. Success felt hollow, and guilt over abandoning his family, his mother's cousin Josie, his old neighborhood, consumed him silently. Approaching the partially open door, Harrison peered through and felt his breath catch. There was Grace Williams, the maid he'd hired 8 months ago, cooking with a Michelin star precision. Her calloused hands manipulated his expensive ingredients with mastery that rivaled celebrity chefs he paid $500 per plate to watch. "Mr. James's diabetes needs balanced sweetness," Grace murmured, plating with an artist's care. She wrote on a card, "This will give you strength," then whispered over the meal, "Please let this feed their bodies and souls." Harrison felt rage, bewilderment, and shame collide. But what disturbed him most was her expertise. How could a domestic worker possess culinary knowledge belonging in elite kitchens? Where had she learned these techniques? And where was all this food going at midnight? This mystery would force Harrison to confront truths he had spent 15 years and millions trying to forget. If you want to see how one woman's secret transforms a billionaire's frozen heart, subscribe and watch until the end. You would be shocked where this goes. Harrison's penthouse stretched across 12,000 square feet of Manhattan's most exclusive real estate, but it felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook Central Park, yet Harrison rarely stopped to notice the view. The furniture, mid-century modern pieces that cost more than most people's cars, sat arranged with museum precision, untouched and unlived in. Everything had its place, everything was perfect, and everything was unbearably empty. His kitchen was a monument to excess. Custom Italian cabinetry, marble countertops imported from Carrara, professional-grade appliances that gleamed under designer lighting. It had cost him over $100,000 to build, and in the 3 years since its completion, Harrison had used it perhaps a dozen times. Instead, the space served as a warehouse for his true obsession, collecting ingredients he would never cook. The temperature-controlled pantry held bottles of white truffle oil worth $500 each, their seals unbroken. The freezer contained Japanese A5 Wagyu beef at $300 per pound, jing indefinitely. Jars of saffron, worth more per ounce than gold, sat in neat rows, their contents untouched. Harrison ordered them compulsively, the way some men collected art or rare wines. He told himself it was about having the finest things available, about being prepared for the perfect culinary moment. But that moment never came. Instead, Harrison ate alone at expensive restaurants, barely tasting the food placed before him. He drank wines he couldn't appreciate and returned each night to his 16-seat dining table where he'd sit in solitary silence with takeout he didn't want. He accumulated but never experienced. He hoarded but never shared. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he refused to acknowledge, he knew he was starving. Grace Williams had worked in his home for 8 months, moving through the space like a ghost. She cleaned, she organized, she maintained the illusion of perfection. Harrison had hired her after a 5-minute interview where he'd made his expectations clear. "I need someone who knows their place." Grace had simply nodded, her expression neutral, and started the following Monday. In all those months, Harrison had never asked her a single personal question. He didn't know where she lived, whether she had family, what dreams kept her awake at night. She existed to him only as a function, the person who kept his museum clean. Her small staff room off the kitchen held a narrow bed, a single shelf of books he'd never noticed were all about cooking, and a worn recipe book he'd never seen her read. There were photos, too, of a young man who might have been her son, but Harrison had never looked closely enough to ask. 3 weeks ago, Harrison had noticed something disturbing. His inventory was off. A bottle of truffle oil was missing, then a package of saffron. Small amounts at first, easy to dismiss as miscounting, but Harrison didn't miscount. He checked his carefully maintained spreadsheet obsessively, cross-referencing receipts and photographs. Someone was stealing from him. The realization ignited something cold and angry in his chest. "I will not be taken advantage of in my own home," he'd muttered, installing hidden cameras throughout the kitchen. For 3 days, he'd reviewed the footage each morning, finding nothing, until tonight. What Harrison didn't know, what the cameras had captured but he hadn't yet seen, was Grace's nightly ritual. Every evening after he fell asleep, she entered his kitchen with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Harrison stepped into the kitchen, and the sudden flood of light made Grace turn sharply. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. The billionaire in his tailored suit, and the maid in her simple clothes, surrounded by evidence of her midnight activities. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harrison's voice came out harder than he'd intended, edged with the anger that had been building for 3 weeks. Grace didn't run. She didn't make excuses or try to hide the containers of food spread across his marble countertop. Instead, she met his eyes with a quiet dignity that somehow made the moment more unsettling. "What it looks like, Mr. Montgomery, I'm using your ingredients." "You're stealing," Harrison said flatly. "I could have you arrested." "Yes, sir, you could." Her calm acceptance infuriated him more than any defensive protest would have. He'd expected denial, tears, pleading. Not this steady acknowledgement of guilt without a trace of shame. "Do you have any idea how much these ingredients cost?" Harrison gestured at the open bottle of truffle oil on the counter. "This truffle oil alone is $500. "I know exactly how much they cost," Grace replied, her voice even. "I also know you've never opened that bottle in the 8 months I've worked here." "That's not the point. They're mine." "Yes, sir, they are." Harrison felt his jaw clench. Every response she gave was technically correct, technically respectful, yet somehow managed to make him feel like he was the one in the wrong. He forced himself to look away from her calm gaze and focus on the evidence before him. That's when he noticed details that didn't fit the narrative of a simple thief. Her knife work was extraordinary. The vegetables were cut with professional precision, perfect brunoise. Julienne strips so uniform they could have come from a Michelin-starred kitchen. "Where did you learn to cut like that? Does it matter?" He moved closer to examine the plated meals. Each one was arranged with an artist's attention to composition and color. "This looks like professional work." Grace remained silent, but Harrison saw something flicker in her expression. Not guilt, but something deeper. Loss, perhaps, or longing. His eyes fell on one of the handwritten words tucked beside a container. He picked it up and read aloud. "Mr. James, extra protein for your strength. Keep fighting." He looked up at Grace. "Who is Mr. James? What is this?" Grace took a slow breath before speaking. "Mr. Montgomery, you have every right to call the police. I won't resist, but I'm asking for 1 hour." "1 hour for what?" "To deliver these meals. They're expecting me. They've already gone hungry too many days this week." Harrison let out a bitter laugh. "You're in no position to ask for anything." "I know." Grace's voice didn't waver. "I'm asking anyway, please." There was something in her eyes that caught Harrison off guard. Not fear of consequences or shame at being caught, but a fierce, protective love for people he didn't know and couldn't understand. It was the kind of emotion he hadn't seen directed at anything in years, possibly because he'd stopped looking for it, or maybe because he'd stopped inspiring it. He should call the police. The evidence was overwhelming. She'd admitted everything. His lawyer could have her prosecuted within hours. It was the logical response, the appropriate response for a man who had just discovered theft in his own home. But curiosity was a stronger force than anger in that moment. Who were these people she was feeding? Why did a maid cook like a trained chef? And why was she willing to risk everything, her job, her freedom, her future, to deliver meals to strangers? Fine, Harrison heard himself say, 1 hour, but I'm following you. And when you get back, you're fired. Grace's shoulders seemed to release tension he hadn't noticed she was holding. Yes, sir. Thank you. She moved quickly then, gathering the containers with practiced efficiency and packing them into insulated bags. Harrison watched her work with the same precision she'd shown in cooking. Nothing wasted, every movement purposeful. Within minutes, she was ready to leave. Harrison stood in his gleaming kitchen, watching Grace walk toward the service entrance with bags heavy enough to make her lean slightly to one side. She didn't look back. As the door closed behind her, Harrison grabbed his coat from the hallway closet. Whatever mystery he was about to uncover, he had a feeling it would be worth losing an hour of sleep, and perhaps worth confronting truths he had been avoiding far longer than 3 weeks. Harrison kept his distance as Grace moved through the Manhattan streets, the insulated bags weighing down her steps. He hadn't done anything like this in years, following someone on foot through the city like a character in a detective novel. The absurdity of it struck him briefly, but curiosity pushed him forward. Grace descended into the subway station, and Harrison hesitated at the top of the stairs. He couldn't remember the last time he'd taken the subway. 15 years maybe. Since before his first major success, back when public transportation was necessity rather than choice. The smell hit him first, that distinctive blend of metal, electricity, and humanity that seemed unique to underground transit. He bought a Metro card from a machine that took 3 tries to accept his credit card, then followed Grace through the turnstile. 2 trains, and 40 minutes later, they emerged in a neighborhood that looked vaguely familiar to Harrison, though he couldn't place why. The buildings were older here, more worn. Graffiti-decorated rolled-down security gates. A bodega on the corner had bars on its windows. Something about the streets tugged at his memory, but the connection remained just out of reach. Grace stopped in front of a 3-story building with crumbling brick facade. A faded sign above the entrance read, Mama Josie's Community Kitchen and Shelter. She pushed through the door and disappeared inside. Harrison approached carefully, staying in the shadows across the street. Through the ground floor windows, he could see into a large room filled with people. 40 or 50 of them, maybe more. Elderly folks in threadbare coats, homeless individuals with overstuffed bags, young mothers holding children, families clustered together on mismatched chairs. The building itself was in terrible condition. He could see peeling paint on the walls, water stains on the ceiling tiles, furniture that looked salvaged from different decades. But despite the obvious poverty, the space was immaculately clean, and there were fresh flowers on every table, cheap carnations in plastic vases, but flowers nonetheless. The moment Grace entered, the entire room seemed to brighten. "Miss Grace is here," someone called out, and faces that had been tired and drawn suddenly lit with genuine joy. What Harrison witnessed next made him forget about the cold seeping through his expensive coat. Grace didn't just distribute the food and leave. She served each person individually, moving from table to table with the care of a host at an intimate dinner party. "Mr. James, how's your leg?" she asked an elderly man with a cane. "This has extra protein tonight." "Destiny, how's the baby?" she said to a young pregnant woman. "You need to eat for both of you." Little Tommy, I made your favorite tonight, she told a small boy who couldn't have been more than 8. Each person received their meal like it was a gift from a five-star restaurant. Harrison watched them close their eyes as they took first bites, savoring flavors in a way he hadn't savored anything in years. These weren't just meals. They were acts of love made tangible. A teenage boy emerged from the back to help Grace plate and serve. He moved with careful reverence, and Harrison noticed immediately that his knife skills were impressive for someone at his age. Grace corrected his technique with gentle words. Confidence in the bud, hey Marcus, trust yourself. Yes, chef, the boy replied, and Harriet caught the title, not Miss Grace, but chef. An elderly woman began to weep quietly as she ate. Bless you, child. This is the only real food I'll eat this week. A veteran with a faded army jacket approached Grace. You remind me why I fought. People like you. Children showed Grace drawings they'd made, all of her cooking, with hearts and thank you scrawled in crayon. Harrison noticed the walls were covered with them, a gallery of gratitude from the smallest hands. He'd come here to catch a thief, but what he was witnessing was something else entirely. These meals were prepared with skill that matched restaurants where he paid $500 per plate, but they were being given away to people society had learned to ignore. She's wasting her talent on... Harrison started to think, then stopped. No, wait, is this waste or is this... An elderly black woman emerged from the kitchen and embraced Grace. Harrison couldn't see her face clearly from his position across the street, but something about her voice when she spoke carried through the window. Baby girl, you're late tonight. I was worried. I'm sorry, Mama. There was a complication. You look troubled. We'll talk after. There was something familiar about that voice, but Harrison couldn't place it. It nagged at him as he turned away from the window and began the long journey back to his penthouse. He didn't confront Grace. He had no words for what he'd just seen. Back home, he poured himself a $300 glass of wine and sat in his spotless kitchen, surrounded by his collection of unused ingredients. The wine tasted like nothing. Everything tasted like nothing. What am I doing? He whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Harrison didn't fire Grace. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, gathering more information before making a decision. But the truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. He didn't know what to do with what he'd witnessed. He watched her work, really watched her for the first time in 8 months. Grace moved through his penthouse with practiced invisibility, dusting surfaces that were already clean, organizing spaces that were already organized. She was efficient, careful, and utterly unremarkable in her movements. It struck Harrison with sudden force that she'd been in his home for 8 months and he knew absolutely nothing about her. Not her story, not her dreams, not even basic facts beyond her last name. After Grace left for the day, Harrison retreated to his study and pulled up the security footage. He watched her cook night after night, her technique flawless in every frame. Julienne cuts so precise they could have been measured with calipers. Brunoise that would satisfy the strictest French chef. Sauce reductions timed to perfection. She tasted as she worked, and Harrison found himself watching her face closely, the way she closed her eyes, analyzing flavors with the concentration of a sommelier evaluating wine. Then he noticed something else. After each cooking session, Grace pulled out a small notebook and wrote for several minutes before packing the meals. Harrison felt the pull of curiosity override his sense of boundaries. 20 minutes later, he stood in Grace's small staff room, holding that notebook in his hands. What he found inside made his chest tighten. These weren't just recipes. They were detailed profiles of every person at the shelter, written with the care of a doctor maintaining patient files. Mr. James, diabetes, needs low glycemic meals. Loves rosemary, one entry read. Destiny, 3rd trimester, anemic, needs iron-rich foods, but morning sickness limits options. Ginger helps. Tommy, 8 years old, lives in car with mom, allergic to nuts, loves anything with cheese, needs normalcy, page after page of careful attention, personalized nutrition, dignity rendered in meal planning. This wasn't charity. This was high-level cuisine adapted to individual medical needs and personal preferences. This was care given form. Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he set down the notebook and noticed another book beneath it, older with a cracked leather cover. He opened it to find handwritten recipes dating back to the 1950s, the ink faded but still legible. In the margins, notes written in a different hand. Made this for the Williams family. Mrs. Williams said it was the best she ever had. She'll never know I added the secret ingredient, imagining I would be cooking in my own restaurant. Further down the page, another note. Gracie, age 6, helped me today. She has the gift. Lord, please let her use it in ways I never could. Harrison closed the book carefully, something shifting in his chest. This wasn't just Grace's talent. This was a legacy passed down through generations, a dream deferred and inherited. He returned to his study and made a phone call he knew crossed every line of appropriate employer behavior. I need you to find everything about Grace Williams, he told his private investigator. Former employment, education, criminal record, everything. May I ask why? The investigator asked. Because nothing about her makes sense. 48 hours later, Harrison held a report that made the puzzle pieces fall into place and raised even more disturbing questions. Grace had graduated from the Culinary Institute of America on full scholarship, top 5% of her class. She'd worked as an apprentice at Daniel, been promoted to line cook at Le Bernardin, made junior sous chef at 11 Madison Park. Her trajectory had been meteoric. Then, 8 years ago, it had ended abruptly. Accusation of theft, $5,000 from the safe at a restaurant called DuPont. Charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. But her reputation was destroyed. The accuser was Chef Laurent DuPont, now owner of 3 successful Manhattan restaurants. Harrison's fingers flew across his keyboard. DuPont's public profile was impressive. Awards, glowing reviews, media. Darling. But deeper searches revealed cracks in the facade. Reddit threads mentioned his abusive behavior. Anonymous reviews spoke of scapegoating. And one archived blog post, deleted but preserved by the internet's long memory, stated plainly, he framed her. We all knew it, but who's going to believe a black line cook over a French master chef? Harrison leaned back in his chair, his mind churning. Grace had used his property without permission. Technically theft, but she was probably innocent of the accusation that had destroyed her career. She was using stolen goods for good. But did that justify the stealing? His black and white worldview was crumbling, and he didn't know what to replace it with. What is justice here? He muttered to the empty room. He pulled up the shelter's address, intending to learn more about the place. When he saw the street name, his blood went cold. This was his old neighborhood. The place he'd grown up, the place he'd abandoned the moment the success gave him the means to escape. I have to see this place in the daylight, Harrison whispered, already reaching for his coat. Harrison dressed in clothes he hadn't worn in years, jeans, a plain jacket, sneakers that had been buried in the back of his closet. When his driver asked about the schedule, Harrison waved him off. I'm going alone today. The subway felt different in daylight, crowded with people heading to work or coming home from night shifts. Harrison found a seat and watched the stations pass, memories flooding back unbidden. He'd ridden this same train with his mother countless times, her tired face softening when she looked at him, her hands rough from cleaning other people's homes. The same homes that had paid for his education, his escape, his fortune. When he emerged at his old stop, the neighborhood hit him like a physical blow. Everything was different, but the same. The corner store where his mother had bought groceries every Saturday was boarded up now, graffiti covering the security gate. The park where he'd played as a child was mostly dirt, the equipment broken and rusted. The buildings looked more worn than he remembered, as if the neighborhood itself had aged faster than it should have. He'd escaped this. Others couldn't. The weight of that reality settled heavy on his shoulders. A line of people stretched from the shelter's entrance halfway down the block. Harrison joined it, keeping his head down, listening to the conversations around him. "Miss Grace's meals are the only thing keeping me going," an elderly man said to the woman beside him. "She taught my son Marcus to cook," another voice added. "Gave him hope when he had none." The word struck Harrison with unexpected force. Grace wasn't just feeding bodies. She was feeding souls. Inside, the shelter was as run down as he'd seen from the window. Peeling paint, water-stained ceiling, mismatched furniture that had clearly been salvaged from different eras. But it was clean, and the people moved through the space with quiet dignity. Harrison followed the sound of voices to the kitchen and found Grace teaching 4 teenagers, Marcus among them. She was in full chef mode, commanding, precise, encouraging in a way that demanded excellence. "Marcus, that dice is uneven," she said, examining his work. "In cooking, consistency shows respect for the diner." "Shanice, taste as you go. Your tongue is your best tool." The teenagers hung on her every word, their faces reflecting something Harrison recognized. Belief that they could be more than circumstance had told them they were. Grace was demonstrating how to transform humble ingredients. Budget cooking isn't about being cheap, it's about being creative. What can you do with rice, beans, and imagination? Her hands moved with practiced grace, turning simple staples into something that looked restaurant-worthy. Harrison watched transfixed. This was what he'd been missing his entire wealthy life, using skill to create value, not just consuming what others created. "Gracie, baby, we need more potatoes if we're going to—" An elderly woman entered the kitchen and stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locked on Harrison. Time seemed to freeze. Harrison looked up and felt the air leave his lungs. Harrison? Harrison Montgomery. Cousin Josephine. Mama Josie, his mother's cousin who had helped raise him when his mother worked double shifts. The woman he had sent a check to 15 years ago when he made his first million. The woman who'd sent it back with a note. "I don't want your money. I want my family." The woman whose letters he'd never answered. "Cousin Josie," Harrison managed. I didn't know this was your shelter." Grace's eyes moved between them, confusion giving way to shock. "You two know each other?" "Know each other?" Josie's voice carried layers of emotion Harrison couldn't untangle. "Harrison is my cousin. His mom and I grew up together." Grace's expression shifted, shock melting into something that looked like betrayal. "I wrote you letters, Harrison," Josie said quietly. "Called your office. You never answered." I'm sorry. I was busy with—" "Busy. Yes. Too busy for family." Her tone wasn't angry, just profoundly sad, which somehow felt worse. "Your mama told me you'd forget us when you made it big." I told her she was wrong. I should have believed her. Grace's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Wait, you're telling me you've known this whole time that your cousin runs a shell that's struggling to survive?" "I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Oh. Her earlier respect had evaporated completely. "You're just like him, just like Chef DuPont. You use people, then throw them away when they remind you of things you'd rather forget." Harrison looked around the shelter, the peeling paint, the leaking ceiling, the outdated equipment held together with determination and prayer. 1 month of his wine budget could fix everything. One phone call could have saved Josie years of struggle. The weight of his choices crashed down on him with crushing clarity. Miss Grace, the lunch service is starting, Marcus said gently. We need to finish prep. Grace turned to Harrison, her voice steady but final. You should go, Mr. Montgomery. You don't belong here. As Harrison turned toward the door, Josie called out, Harrison! He stopped but couldn't turn around. I forgave you a long time ago, baby. I just wish you'd forgive yourself. Your mama would want you to come home. It's not too late. Harrison left in silence, unable to find words that wouldn't sound hollow. Behind him, Marcus asked quietly, Chef, who was that? Grace watched the door close. Someone who has everything and nothing at the same time. Mama Josie's voice was soft. Be gentle with him, Gracie. He's lost, and the lost need feeding too. The elevator ride up into his penthouse felt like ascending away from reality, leaving behind something raw and true for the sterile comfort of wealth. Harrison stepped into his 12,000 square feet of emptiness and saw it all with new eyes. The art on the walls that he'd purchased because advisors told him it would appreciate. The books on shelves he'd never opened. The kitchen he'd spent a fortune building, but never really used. This isn't a home, he whispered to the silence. It's a museum to my own emptiness. He descended to his temperature-controlled wine cellar, surrounded by $500,000 worth of bottles he'd collected like trophies. Harrison pulled out a 2000 Bordeaux worth $2,000, opened it with hands that trembled slightly, and poured a glass. He brought it to his lips, tasted, and felt nothing. The wine might as well have been water. He poured it down the utility sink and opened another bottle. Same result. Then another and another. Soon he was pulling bottles from their carefully organized racks, opening them with increasing desperation, pouring liquid worth thousands of dollars down the drain like it meant nothing. Because it didn't. None of it did. What's the point? He shouted at the empty cellar. What is the point? Harrison stumbled to his study and found himself pulling an old cardboard box from the back of his closet, one he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside were photographs from another life. His mother in her cleaning woman's uniform, smiling at his high school graduation despite her exhaustion. Mama Josie at his mother's funeral, her arm around his shoulders while he stood rigid and distant, already planning his escape from grief and memory. At the bottom of the box, he found a note in his mother's handwriting, the last words she'd written to him before the cancer took her. Don't forget where you came from, baby. Success means nothing if you forget the people who lifted you up. Harrison wept for the first time in years, the grief he'd been outrunning finally catching him. At 2 in the morning, he called his lawyer. David, I need you to investigate someone. Harrison, do you know what time it is? Chef Laurent Dupont. I think he framed someone for embezzlement 8 years ago. Can this wait until morning? No, it's already 8 years too late. Harrison spent the rest of the night researching, his eyes burning as he pieced together a pattern that made his stomach turn. Grace had been accused in May 2015. Dupont had opened his first solo restaurant in August 2015, a venture requiring $200,000 in capital. He'd claimed savings and a family loan, but public records showed no family members in the United States, no loan documents. The deeper Harrison dug, the clearer the pattern became. 3 previous restaurants where money had gone missing. Each time a junior staff member, always a person of color, had been blamed. Charges never stuck, but careers were destroyed. And Dupont always left shortly after, moving up the ladder. He's done this before, Harrison said to his empty office. Grace wasn't the first. She was just another stepping stone. He pulled out Grace's employment file from when he had hired her. There it was on her application. Culinary Institute of America, top 5% of class. He'd never even looked at it. He'd just seen domestic service experience and stopped reading. He'd had a trained chef cleaning his floors for 8 months and never asked about her background. The sun rose over Manhattan, finding Harrison disheveled and exhausted, staring at his reflection in the window. He looked broken open, and perhaps that was necessary. I can't undo abandoning Josie, he said to his reflection. I can't give Grace back 8 years, but I can do something now. The shift was seismic, from what do I have to what can I give. At 7 a.m., he called his lawyer back. I want you to hire the best investigative team money can buy. I want every financial record DuPont has ever touched. I want witness interviews. I want evidence that will hold up in court. Harrison, this will be expensive. I don't care, do it. He called his accountant next. I'm liquidating some assets. I need $2 million liquid in 1 week. For what purpose? Something I should have done 15 years ago. At 6 the next morning, Harrison showed up at the shelter. Grace was already there, prepping for breakfast service. She looked up, startled. Mr. Montgomery, what are you doing here? Harrison's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. I need to talk to you and Mama Josie, please. Harrison shifted from, what do I have, to what can I give? What was your turning point from accumulating to giving? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire someone struggling to find theirs. Subscribe to see what Harrison does next. Mama Josie's small office barely fit 3 people. Harrison sat across from Grace and Josie, the cramped space forcing an intimacy that made what he had to say even harder. I owe you both the truth about who I am, Harrison began. Grace's expression was steel. We know who you are, a billionaire who's slumming to feel better about himself. No. Harrison's voice was quiet but firm. I'm the son of a cleaning woman who worked herself to death so I could go to college. I'm the cousin who abandoned Josie because I was ashamed of being poor. I'm a coward who built walls of money to hide from his own guilt. He told them about his mother's death 5 years ago, how her last words had haunted him. Don't forget where you came from. How he'd deliberately forgotten anyway, changed his phone number, moved to a different world, created a new identity built on erasure. I didn't want to be the poor kid anymore, Harrison said. I wanted to be someone important. Josie's voice was gentle. You were always important, Harrison. You just forgot. Harrison turned to Grace, pulling papers from his briefcase. Grace, I've spent the last 24 hours investigating what happened to you. Grace stiffened. You had no right. I know, but I did it anyway. And I found something. He spread the documents across Josie's desk, financial discrepancies in DuPont's records, a pattern of accusations, timeline inconsistencies. I think he stole money from 4 different restaurants and blamed junior staff each time. I think you were innocent. Grace was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice trembled. I know I was innocent. I've known for 8 years. But knowing and proving are different things. No one believed me then. Why would they believe me now? Because this time you have resources, my resources. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. And it's 8 years overdue. Harrison explained that his legal team had found enough evidence to file a civil suit against DuPont and were reporting their findings to the district attorney. This won't be easy. He'll fight back. Your name will be in the press again. Grace's chin lifted. I've lived with shame for 8 years. I think I can handle some newspaper articles. Her strength was visible now, no longer hidden beneath deference. Do it. Harrison turned to Mama Josie and pulled out a check. Cousin, I can't undo 15 years of silence, but I can do something now. He placed the check on the desk. $2 million. $500,000 for immediate building repairs and equipment. $1.5 million endowment so you never have to worry about rent or utilities again. Josie stared at the check, then pushed it back. Harrison, I can't accept this. Why not? Because I don't want your money. I never did. I wanted you. I wanted my family. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. You think money fixes abandonment? No, Harrison said, but it's a start. And I'm not just writing a check and leaving. I'm here, I'm showing up. I'm asking if there's room at your table for a prodigal cousin. Josie's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Harrison into a fierce hug. There's always been a seat for you, baby, always. Grace watched the reunion, her anger softening into something more complex. Gracie, what do you think? Josie asked. Should we forgive him? That's not my place, Mama. He's your family. You're my family too, baby. You get a vote. Grace looked at Harrison, really looked at him. Not the billionaire employer, but a broken man trying to find his way home. I think people deserve second chances, if they're willing to do the work. Harrison's next words came carefully. I have one more idea, and I need both of you for it to work. He explained his vision, a restaurant that was half community kitchen, half fine dining. The profits from one side would fund the free meals on the other. Grace, you'd be executive chef, full creative control, ownership stake, your name on everything. Why would you do this? Because 8 years ago, the culinary world lost a genius, and I have the power to give her back to them. Grace hesitated. I don't know if I can do this. It's been so long. What if I fail? Mama Josie took her hand. Baby, you've been cooking miracles out of my broken down kitchen for 2 years. Imagine what you could do with proper equipment. Marcus's voice came from the doorway. Chef, you taught me that talent doesn't disappear just because people stop looking. Maybe it's time for them to look again. Grace straightened. If I do this, I have conditions. Marcus and the other kids I've been teaching, they get real jobs in the kitchen, not charity positions, real apprenticeships. Done. My grandmother's recipes get honored. This isn't just French fine dining. It's Southern soul food elevated. It's fusion. It's my vision. Done. And you don't get to swoop in and save me. We're partners. Equals, or I walk. Harrison extended his hand. Partners. Grace shook it firmly. Partners. They spent the next hour planning. 6 months to renovate, build the kitchen, train staff. Grace would develop the menu. Harrison would handle financing and business operations. Mama Josie would oversee the community side. Marcus would be junior sous chef. As they prepared to leave, Harrison asked quietly, would you cook something for me? Not as my maid, as a chef. Grace considered, what do you want? Something real, something that matters to you. Come back tomorrow night, 7 p.m., and bring your appetite and your honesty. Grace entered Harrison's professional kitchen as a chef, not a maid. She pulled out her grandmother's worn recipe book, its pages stained with decades of use, and selected ingredients with careful purpose. Not the most expensive, but the most meaningful. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice from childhood. Baby girl, food is how we tell people we love them when words aren't enough. Harrison arrived at exactly 7 p.m., unusually nervous. The penthouse smelled like home for the first time since he'd owned it. Jazz played softly in the background, Grace's choice. The dining table, usually cold and empty, was set for two with simple elegance. Fresh flowers from Mama Josie's shelter garden, cloth napkins, candles creating warmth in the sterile space. Grace emerged from the kitchen in chef's whites, no longer wearing the uniform of servitude. Tonight, you're not eating at a 5-star restaurant. You're eating at my grandmother's table, and in her kitchen, every dish tells a story. The first course was she crab soup with a touch of sherry. Grace placed it before Harrison with ceremony. My grandmother made this for the families she worked for in Charleston. They never knew she'd learned it from her own grandmother, who'd cooked it for plantation owners. She reclaimed it, made it hers, made it ours. Harrison tasted and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, food meant something. I can taste the love in it. Is that crazy? That's the secret ingredient, Grace said softly. The only one that really matters. The second course was pan-seared duck breast with blackberry gastrique and collard greens cooked with smoked turkey. Grace's voice held emotion as she explained, "This is what I was going to serve on opening night of my own restaurant, before everything fell apart. I'd planned every detail, the plate, the garnish, the story I'd tell about fusion, bringing French technique to Southern soul. I never got to serve it to anyone until tonight." Harrison tasted the duck, crispy skin, perfectly medium rare center. "Grace, this is better than any Michelin-starred restaurant I've been to. Because Michelin stars measure technique, this measures something else." The third course was humble ingredients, elevated. Butter beans, cornbread, tomato salad. This is what Mama Josie fed me when I had nothing, when I wanted to give up. She took ingredients most people overlook and made them taste like dignity. She taught me that poverty isn't about what you lack. It's about what others refuse to see you already have. Harrison ate in silence, tears forming. This simple food moved him more than $1,000 meals ever had. Dessert was peach cobbler with vanilla bean ice cream. My grandmother used to say, "Baby, peach cobbler is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy." She made this the day I got my acceptance letter to culinary school. She died 6 months later. Never got to see me graduate. This is for her, and for everyone who believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. Harrison was visibly emotional. I've spent millions of dollars on meals that didn't make me feel a fraction of what I feel right now. What's the difference? The difference is intention. Tonight, I cook to feed your soul, not your status. Harrison leaned forward. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? My mother used to cook Sunday dinners. Nothing fancy, chicken, rice, green beans, but our apartment would smell like heaven. After she died, I threw myself into work. Started eating at expensive restaurants because I thought that's what successful people did. But nothing ever tasted like home. Nothing ever tasted like love. Until tonight." Grace's voice was soft. "I was so angry when you caught me stealing your ingredients. Not because I got caught, but because I thought you'd be like all the others, see me as a thief and nothing more. But you looked deeper. You asked questions. You cared enough to find the truth. That's rarer than any truffle in your pantry." Harrison took a breath. "I don't want you to work for me anymore." Grace's face fell. "I understand. No, you don't. I don't want you to work for me. I want you to work with me. Real partners. Your name first on everything." Grace's table, that's what we call the restaurant. Tears flowed down Grace's cheeks. "You mean that?" Every word. Harrison's phone rang, his lawyer. "We just heard from DuPont's legal team. They want to settle $50,000 in a non-disclosure agreement." Harrison looked at Grace. "What do you want to do?" "Tell him to go to hell. I want a trial. I want my name cleared publicly. I want every chef he did this to know they can fight back." Harrison smiled into the phone. "You heard her. We go to trial." He hung up and looked at Grace. "You're terrifying." "I love it." As Grace stood to leave, Harrison stopped her. "Wait, why did you stay working for me? You could have walked away months ago." "Honestly, at first it was just a job. But then I saw your kitchen, all those ingredients going to waste, all that potential for feeding people, unused. I thought, I can do something with this. I can turn his excess into someone else's survival. I didn't expect to care about you, but watching you tonight, tasting food like it's the first time you've ever really eaten, you were hungry too, just for something money can't buy. Will you teach me to cook, really cook?" "Why?" "Because I've spent my whole life consuming. I want to learn to create, to nourish, to give." Grace smiled. "First lesson, tomorrow, 6 a.m. at Mama Josie's Kitchen. We cook breakfast for 50 people. I'll be there. And Harrison, wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. Real cooking is messy. Food made with love can't be bought. If you've experienced a meal that connected you to memory, love, or home, tell us about it in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe. We're heading into the final moment. 6 months later, Grace's Table opened its doors in a renovated building in Grace's old neighborhood. The exterior told the story of the restaurant's dual purpose. One entrance, elegant and inviting for fine dining patrons. Another wide open for community meals. A sign in the window declared, "Everyone eats here. Some pay with money, some pay with presents. All are welcome." Inside, the space was intentionally split. 25 seats for fine dining on one side, 50 for community meals on the other. A glass wall revealed the shared kitchen where chefs worked, visible to both rooms. The walls displayed photographs of Mama Josie's shelter, the community, Grace's grandmother, and Harrison's mother. This wasn't charity separated from fine dining. It was deliberately integrated. The message was clear. Dignity doesn't depend on your wallet. In the kitchen, Grace commanded the line in chef's whites with her name embroidered across the chest. Her grandmother's recipe book sat open on the counter, protected by plastic but still in use. Marcus, now 18 with a culinary scholarship starting in the fall, led the appetizer station with confidence that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Shanice, Tommy, now 10, and Destiny worked the line. Destiny's baby sleeping in a carrier during prep. They all earned living wages with benefits and a pathway to real careers. Harrison worked the pass, actually expediting orders rather than hovering as an owner. Grace had taught him over 6 months of early mornings at Mama Josie's Kitchen. He still made mistakes, but he was learning. His apron read, "Learning to Serve." Opening night brought food critics from major publications, celebrity chefs, and investors to the fine dining side. On the community side, Mama Josie sat at the head of the table beaming with pride, surrounded by shelter regulars. Mr. James, Destiny's mother, veterans, families. Grace's former CIA classmates who'd believed in her sat alongside neighborhood residents proud that one of their own had made it. 3 other chefs, all victims of Chef DuPont's pattern of framing, had come to witness Grace's vindication. Grace stood between both dining rooms for her opening speech. 8 years ago, I lost my career because someone powerful decided I was disposable. For a long time, I believed him. But my grandmother used to say, "Baby, your gift isn't yours to hide. It's yours to share." Tonight, we're sharing with everyone. On this side, you'll pay $150 for a tasting menu. On this side, you'll pay nothing but the promise to come back when you can. Same kitchen, same care, same love. Because everyone deserves to eat food that was cooked like it matters. Welcome to Grace's Table. The service was flawless. Grace served her grandmother's recipes elevated with French technique, each dish telling a story printed on the menu. Critics took notes frantically. Community diners wept with joy. Marcus perfectly executed a complex sauce, and Grace nodded with pride. The New York Times critic whispered to her companion, "This is the most important restaurant I've reviewed in 20 years. It's not just food, it's a manifesto." Grace brought Mama Josie a special plate. "The first meal I ever made for you, remember? Butter beans and cornbread. You were so ashamed it wasn't fancy. You told me it was the best meal you'd ever had. I meant it then, I mean it now." They embraced like mother and daughter. Harrison stepped away from the pass, overwhelmed. Grace found him in the office. "You okay? My mother would have loved this. She would have been so proud." "She is proud. And Harrison, you did what she asked. You came home." A VIP guest asked to meet the chef who'd made the duck course. Grace brought Marcus out. "Young man, where did you train?" at a shelter kitchen with the best chef in the world. The guest handed Marcus a business card. When you finish culinary school, call me. You have a job. Harrison's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. DuPont just agreed to full public apology and 500K settlement. Wants to avoid trial. 3 other victims joining lawsuit. Harrison showed Grace. She closed her eyes. It's over. It's finally over. No, Harrison said. It's finally beginning. At 11 p.m., both dining rooms were empty, the kitchen clean, staff gathered around the community table. Grace brought out peach cobbler. For us, we earned this. Harrison raised his glass. 6 months ago, I thought I was successful because I had money. Tonight, I learned what success actually looks like. Thank you for teaching me that the best investment I ever made wasn't in stocks. It was in people. Grace's response was soft. Harrison, you asked me once why I stayed working for you. I think I finally know the answer. I stayed because you were hungry, and I'm a chef. Feeding people is what I do. You were starving for purpose, connection, home. And somehow, in trying to feed others, we both got fed. So thank you for being brave enough to get hungry and humble enough to let someone feed you. 1 year later, Grace's table had a 6-month waiting list. The community side served 200 meals daily. 4 more restaurants had opened using the same model. Harrison had sold his penthouse and moved into a modest apartment above the restaurant. Grace appeared on the cover of Bon Appetit. DuPont's restaurants were under investigation. At 5 a.m., Grace and Harrison prepped in the kitchen. Not employer and employee, not even just partners, but family. Grace taught Harrison to properly dice an onion. He laughed at his mistakes. The kitchen filled with early morning light, her grandmother's recipe book open between them. Grace's voice carried the final truth. My grandmother used to say, baby, if you're ever lost, go back to the kitchen. That's where love lives. That's where healing happens. She was right, we were all lost. But we found our way back to the table, and we saved each other a seat. This story is dedicated to every person whose talent was buried by injustice. Your gifts are still there, waiting. And to everyone with excess who thinks they have nothing to give, open your hands, open your heart, open your table. There's always room for one more. If this story touched you, subscribe to this channel for more stories of redemption, justice, and the power of second chances. Share this video with someone who needs to remember it's never too late to come home.